Hello, future fifth graders, and welcome to today's Comparing Fractions lesson. We are going to talk about comparing fractions with like numerators. Fractions with like numerators are fractions that have the same numerators. For example, 3/4 and 3/8 both have like numerators. They both have a numerator of 3. Let's begin our lesson on comparing like fractions with a review of a few vocabulary words related to the study of fractions. First, what is a fraction? A fraction is a number that names part of a whole object or part of a group of objects. A fraction has two parts, a numerator and a denominator. The denominator of a fraction tells us the total number of equal parts in the whole object, or in a group of objects. It is the number on the bottom of a fraction. The denominator in 3/4 is 4 and tells us that 3/4 has 4 total parts. The way I remember which number is the denominator is to say denominator down, because it is found down on the bottom of the fraction. The numerator of a fraction tells us how many parts are being counted or shaded. It is the number on the top of a fraction. In 3/4, the numerator is 3. It tells us that 3/4 has 3 parts being counted or shaded. When we compare fractions, we decide whether two fractions are equal to each other or whether one is greater than another. To record that in a number sentence, we use the comparison symbols for greater than, less than, and equal to. When you record a comparison between two fractions in a number sentence, it is important to read it from left to right as if you were reading a sentence. It is also important to know how to read the symbols correctly and how to record them correctly. So let's review the symbols. When you use the greater than symbol, it opens to the left in your number sentence. When you use the less than symbol, it opens to the right. The equal sign is written as two marks, one on top of the other. Some of you may remember the alligator who always eats the larger amount in a comparison number sentence. That means the alligator is going to eat the bigger shaded pieces in a fraction comparison. The alligator always wants the bigger shaded pieces. Now we are going to begin comparing two fractions with like numerators, meaning both fractions have the same numerator on the top. Here you see that we are comparing 1/3 and 1/5. The numbers that are circled in these fractions are the numerators. Both have a numerator of 1. Since both fractions have the same numerator, we call these like fractions. Now let's find the denominators in these fractions because both parts of fractions help us compare them. Remember, the denominator is the number on the bottom and tells us the total parts in a fraction. What is the denominator in 1/3? If you said 3, you are correct. What is the denominator in 1/5? If you said 5, you are also correct. I noticed the denominator is different, but the numerator is the same in these like fractions. Let's begin to learn how to compare like fractions with the same numerators. When you compare fractions with the same numerator, that means you are comparing the same number of parts out of the whole. So here we are comparing 1 part out of 3 parts and 1 part out of 5 parts for these fractions. To make comparing easier and a little more fun, we are going to pretend that these two fractions represent pizza slices out of a whole pizza. I actually bought these two whole pizzas for dinner last night, divided them up according to the denominators, and took a photo of them. So the 1/3 in the slide represents one slice out of 3 slices of the whole pizza that you see on the left side of my photo. The 1/5 represents one slice out of 5 slices of the whole pizza that you see on the right side of my photo. The slices you see represent the denominators of these fractions. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3 total slices on the left, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total slices on the right. Now my question for you is, think, how would you cut your pizza to get a bigger slice to eat? Would you divide your pizza into 5 pieces, or would you divide your pizza into 3 pieces? Now to find out which pizza gives you a bigger slice to eat, we will first mark 1/3 and 1/5 with symbols on these two pizza pies. We will use a smiley face to represent 1/3 on the pizza on the left. We will use a star to represent 1/5 on the pizza on the right. Now by looking at the slices under the symbols on the pizzas, we will compare the size of one slice from each pie. The greater fraction will have the larger amount of the whole pizza shaded with a symbol. The greater fraction will have larger slices of pizza. Since we are looking at the same number of slices we want to eat, that is the same numerator of one slice in each pie. Which pizza has more shaded, meaning a larger slice marked by a symbol? If you said the pizza with 3 slices in the whole pizza has a bigger slice, you are correct. That means that 1/3 is a larger slice than 1/5, and 1/3 of a pizza would give you more to eat. So reading the number sentence from left to right, it says that 1/3 is greater than 1/5. In the photo, the slices of pizza with only 3 slices in the whole pizza are cut larger than the slices of pizza with 5 slices. So, each slice in 1/3 of a pizza is larger in size and gives you more to eat than each slice in 1/5 of a pizza. So the greater fraction is actually the one with the smaller denominator. I would rather have 1 out of 3 slices than 1 out of 5 slices of pizza, wouldn't you? Turn and talk with a friend to explain why, if I am very hungry, I want 1 out of 3 slices instead of 1 out of 5. So the greater fraction is actually the one with the smaller denominator. Notice that the smaller denominator gave you a larger slice because the whole pie for 1/3 was divided into fewer slices than the whole pie for 1/5. So our rule for comparing like fractions with the same numerator is the smaller the denominator, the larger the fraction. You can also turn that around and say the larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction. Repeat the rule together with a friend both ways. Now, using a journal or a piece of paper, complete the sentences you see on this slide. Let me read them to you first. Use the word bank to fill in the blanks in your notes. The 2 word choices are larger or smaller. The more pieces a whole is divided into, the blank the pieces are. The fewer pieces a whole is divided into, the blank the pieces are. Be sure to write the complete sentences and fill in the blanks on your paper. I will give you about 5 minutes. Share your answers with a friend. Now let's check your answers. The more pieces a whole is divided into, the smaller the pieces are. The fewer pieces a whole is divided into, the larger the pieces are. And the rule is, larger denominator gives you more total pieces that are smaller if the numerators are the same. Smaller denominator gives you fewer total pieces that are larger if the numerators are the same. The numerators must be the same for these rules to work. Always think pizza slices when comparing fractions with like numerators. Let's review. Comparing fractions with like numerators. What is the rule? In the photo, you can see that the fraction 1/3 has larger pizza slices than the fraction 1/5 when the numerators are the same. This means that 1 out of 3 slices is larger in size than 1 out of 5 slices, and so 1/3 is actually greater than 1/5. You have to think about the size of the slices of pizza to decide which fraction is greater. So the smaller the denominator, the larger the fraction. Now we are going to look at a word problem that compares fractions with like numerators. Before we read it, please write the word problem in your journal or on notebook paper. I'm going to read the word problem to you. On Saturday, the campers paddled 2/8 of their planned trip down the river. On Sunday, they paddled 2/3 of their trip down the river. On which day did the campers paddle farther? Let's discuss and highlight the important information in this problem. We want to start by rereading the question. On which day did the campers paddle farther? And we're going to figure out which words are important to help us answer the question. And we need to think about what we're trying to find out. So I would highlight which day they paddled farther. Now let's read each sentence in the problem one at a time from the top down to determine what words will help us answer the question. On Saturday, the campers paddled 2/8 of their planned trip down the river. I would want to know that on Saturday, they paddled 2/8 of trip. And then on Sunday, they paddled 2/3 of their trip down the river. I want to highlight Sunday, paddled 2/3 of trip. Now what do we need to do to solve this problem? Turn and talk. If you said compare the two like fractions, 2/8 and 2/3, to see which is larger, you are correct. Great job. Notice the rectangular models I drew. They are drawn so that each one is one on top of the other for the two fractions from the word problem. Drawing the fractions this way is a more accurate way to compare them than with circles. You can make sure the ends of the rectangles meet to make sure the whole for each fraction is the same size. To represent this problem, I used the 3 rectangles you see here. Some of you know these as fraction bars. The yellow rectangle with a 1 on it represents the whole distance of the river trip. The blue rectangle represents the 8 total pieces in the denominator for 2/8. The orange rectangle represents the 3 total pieces in the denominator for 2/3. Talk about these questions for a minute. What is the denominator for 2/8? What is the denominator for 2/3? How do you know? If you said the denominator for 2/8 is 8 because it is divided into 8 total pieces, you are correct. If you said the denominator for 2/3 is 3 because it is divided into 3 total pieces, you are also correct. From this we can see that the 8ths are smaller pieces than the thirds because more pieces make up a whole with 8 parts than 3 parts. To use the rectangles to solve this problem and compare 2/8 and 2/3, we also need to consider the numerators of the two fractions. What is the numerator for both fractions? If you said 2, you are correct. How do you know? If you said, because both fractions have a 2 as a top number, you are correct. Let's shade the numerators. Let's shade 2/8 first. This shows 2/8 shaded. Now let's shade 2/3. Now both numerators of the two fractions are shaded. Notice also that the days are also labeled next to the shaded amounts. Now we can compare the like fractions to see which day the campers paddled farther. We can compare these two fractions with the same numerators by looking to see which bar has more shaded, 2/8 or 2/3. Which fraction is larger and represents the day the campers paddled farther on their trip? And how do you know? Turn and talk with a partner for a few moments. If you said 2/3, you are correct. That means the campers paddled farther on Sunday. So if we read from left to right, this tells us that 2/3 is larger than 2/8 because the bar for 2/3 of the trip is longer than the bar for 2/8 of the trip. Write your number sentence under your word problem in your journal or on your paper. Write a complete sentence for the number sentence also. Now let's try some problems together. Let me read the directions to you. Draw and shade the models. Compare the fractions and record greater than, less than, or equal to in between the fractions. Use a piece of paper to record your work. Remember, the greater fraction will be the one with more of the whole shaded. Think about pizza slices. Let's review the rule for comparing the fractions with like numerators, meaning same numerators. Remember, the numerators must be the same number for this rule to work. And in this case, they are. The rule is the smaller the denominator, the larger the fraction, because the size of the parts in the whole would be larger. I can turn that same rule around and still say the same thing, but just backwards. In other words, the larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction, because the size of the parts in the whole would be smaller in that case. Go ahead and work these two problems now, and when we finish all the problems, we will check them together. Remember to think about pizza slices as you do your work. I will read each number sentence from left to right so you can check your answers. On the left, you see that 1/8 is less than 1/3 because 1 out of 8 pieces shaded is less than 1 out of 3. On the right, 3/4 is greater than 3/8 because 3 out of 4 pieces shaded is greater than 3 out of 8 pieces shaded. Now work the next two problems. We will check them together in a few minutes. Reading from left to right, 2/7 is less than 2/3 because 2 out of 7 pieces shaded is less than 2 out of 3. Here the two fractions on the right are the same numerators and the same denominators. So they are exactly the same fractions. They are equal to each other. Answer the word problem on your paper. If the numerators are the same, the greater fraction will have the larger amount of the whole shaded. Remember the rule to compare like numerators. The smaller the denominator, the greater the fraction. Think pizza. Here's the word problem you're going to answer on your own. On Friday, Devin and Carl painted masks for an art project. Devin painted 3/8 of his mask and Carl painted 3/16 of his mask. Who painted a greater fraction of his mask? Draw a rectangular model for each fraction if you need help. Let's check the word problem that you just did. Let's reread the problem first. On Friday, Devin and Carl painted masks for an art project. Devin painted 3/8 of his mask, and Carl painted 3/16 of his mask. Who painted a greater fraction of his mask? Your answer, Carl painted more of his mask than Devin. Since both fractions have the same numerator of 3, and the denominator of 3/8 is a smaller number than the denominator of 3/16, the rule is, the smaller the denominator, the larger the fraction. So 3/8 is greater than 3/16 because 3 out of 8 parts painted are bigger than 3 out of 16 parts painted, if comparing like fractions. Keep practicing. Can we help you? Logging off.